Good evening and welcome to All for United WFC with me, Matt Crane. Really important show tonight. So we're going to be talking about attitudes towards women's football, mainly attitudes from men's fans or males, comments, abuse, things like that, perceptions of the women's game, and everything that we need to do to educate people really to sort of look to improve the situation if we can, as sort of fans of the game. So delighted to be joined tonight as always by Gareth. How are we?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Ashley as well, welcome to the show. I know you've been on a Wednesday with John. How are you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. Thanks for having me back on as well.
That's absolute pleasure. And Catherine as well, welcome back. I know we've been on shows together before as well. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
A pleasure. So obviously tonight then, we mentioned sort of talking, and the reason we're doing this show, obviously, like I say, we want to give sort of viewers, some information and education. Obviously, that's why, we've got obviously yourself, Ashley, and Catherine on to talk about this. I think it's something we feel as a channel that's really important. And obviously, having read those two articles, there was a study by Durham University that put out two articles, and it was regarding, like I say, perceptions of women's sport and women's football. And I think as a male, it was disheartening to read that the majority, a good chunk of the sort of people surveyed, it was abuse, whether it was sexist, things like that, people posting things online, saying things in person. That was all happening, and that, like I say, had come from sort of males. So Ashley, I'll sort of start with you then. I don't know if you've maybe personally experienced anything like this yourself, whether you've heard it, but do you just want to start off then with sort of your thoughts on it, and then we'll lead into you, Catherine?
I think it's quite shocking to see how, because I haven't experienced it personally. Like through school, I was always interested in football, and I always got on with lads and was always one who would play with the boys. And then obviously when we got older and things, I was always like playing with them, and they never really made a comment about me. I was the only girl in like my football team when I was in primary, and no one ever made a comment or anything. So it's kind of one of them that it was quite shocking to see how bad it has been right in that study, and how it was split into like 3 different groups, and the one that was the highest group was the ones that had such bad attitudes about like sexism and things. And obviously I've probably experienced it more in terms of like what I'm doing now is in like a journalism, but to see it from it's still happening for like younger girls and stuff now, and the ones who are playing professionally and earning their right to play, same as the men do, it is kind of shocking. But I think it links on to what we were on about last week. I think it's kind of an expected thing still, even though it's getting better and more. I still think more does need to be done in terms of education and things of how to speak to women, girls or women, whoever it might be playing, depending on their age, how to like speak to them properly instead of bringing them down or saying, go and do more feminine sports like netball or athletics or whatever. They should be encouraged to do whatever they want to do, kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Catherine, I sort of want to come to you, and obviously you can sort of follow on from Ashley's points, but as well, Ashley was mentioning sort of like, when she was younger and things like that. But I think from what I was reading as well, this is even happening to adults at games. Stuff's being shouted in the stands by fans, and it's baffling because, you think that it's lower down, then you read, well, actually, no, it's not. It's in the stands and it's day-to-day life. And it seems to be happening all over, doesn't it? Whether you're young, whether you're old, there's still the attitudes that are poor and uneducated that are still going around. So do you want to sort of offer your thoughts and lead into that?
No, I mean, I think in general, it's a societal problem. This isn't something that's exclusive to football or exclusive to sports. But I think because sports have long been a domain that men have been able to claim as almost exclusively their own, in part because women were like, in the UK, they were actually banned from playing the most popular sport in the country for 50 years. It's been an area where, like misogyny ripe in society, but it's an area where it's still okay to be open about it. And because women are often, like, even in the sports where women are the highest percentage of fans, like I know rugby has a high percentage of women's fans. Like I think in Ireland it's like 30%, and there are other, like, even in places where you do have a high percentage of fans, you're still outnumbered by men. So it opens the door. What I find disconcerting, and it's happened to me, is when I'm in a group with guys and I might be one of the women or the only woman, and you start having this abuse shouted at you and nobody else says anything. And as a woman, it's difficult to fight back if you don't have support around you of people going, no, this isn't acceptable, this isn't okay. I think as women's sports come more and more on television, you will see this decrease. But what I found shocking about the Durham the Durham research project that they did is just the overwhelming majority of men who had no problems stating that they were misogynistic and that this type of attitude and of language was okay to use in sport. So, I mean, I am older than Ashlea. I've got more than 10 years on you, and like I've seen a huge difference in as someone who's been a fan of women's football for a long time. I've seen a huge difference in just the ability of women to be able to play, but at the same time, it is frustrating when you see this acceleration to see that the attitudes don't follow. And I think one of the problems that we might sometimes have as fans of women's sports, especially if you're a lot on social media or you follow just exclusive, is you end up in this little ecosphere and you don't realize that when you get out of that, it really isn't accepted necessarily as within the ecosphere, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think for me, I agree completely. Like, I think the study is using football in this instance as just like a microcosm of society, and that these issues are deeper societal problems, which is what they actually point out as well in the articles, that is just reflective of the patriarchal society, and clearly can't comment on this from a female perspective, but can comment on this from like a sociological perspective. And the thing that really stood out to me was the fact that this wasn't just a couple of generations of people. It wasn't just a couple of age demographics. It was a universal attitude across all ages. So, you know, the way to stop this isn't necessarily through football, although we know that football can be a real driving force for positive change. You know, we kind of saw Marcus Rashford last summer using the platform that he has to try and bring attitudes towards the free school meals issue. But it is like a deep-rooted societal problem, and it isn't going to change quickly, unfortunately. And, you know, what Catherine said there about calling it out is absolutely the first step that could be made. It's an education thing of, you know, if you have not just boys, but just children in general, just it should be way more normalized. And maybe it's just that whole British thing of not wanting to stick your head above the parapet. But yeah, if you should be able to call your mates out when they're being inappropriate, whether that's sexism, whether that's casual racism or homophobia or anything. Like if they're being derogatory, then we need to call that out. And I think that has got to be like the first step. And you know, with a few years ago, not years ago, but you know, with the Me Too movement, and with kind of all the femicide and things that we're seeing, that actually these attitudes are dangerous, and they do need to be called out, and they do need to be challenged. And you know, I think from my opinion, if a friend would kind of turn around and sort of have a dig back after I've called them out on something, well, then maybe actually that I don't really want to be their friend anyway. But yeah, it is shocking, and it is, like we say, a deeper societal problem than just football. But you know, hopefully we can use football here as a mechanism for change.
Like, what I was actually referring to is I've had times where I might be amongst a group of people and you hear somebody else calling it out, but you're the minority women within a group of guys, and there's not a single guy there. Like that, you can see some of them are, and I understand how difficult it might be to actually call people out. And I know I've been in positions where I should have called people out and I haven't. But the issue sometimes when you're the only woman and you want to call something out and you're surrounded by men is, if you're the only one, as a woman, it can be difficult to call out abuse that's directed either directly towards you or to just being a woman, in the same way that if you're the only LGBTQ and you hear homophobic things, it might be difficult to be the only one who speaks out. If you're the only person of color or minority, it might be difficult to be the only one that speaks out. And in the end, it can't come from the people that are targeted. This has to be a societal change where we all say, you know what, this is not acceptable. It is not acceptable to use this language. It is not acceptable to have these attitudes. Like, one of the things that I do find frustrating is like we've done, like, you see the FA doing campaigns on when it comes to tackling racism. They're doing campaigns when it comes to tackling homophobia, and society has done that as well. But I find sexism and misogyny is one of the last areas where, well, not one of, like, I mean, ableism is probably arguably another one that almost no one talks, but sexism is prevalent within society, and it's one of the areas where you can still say things constantly and people won't be called out. People will rarely be fired for that type of thing, not to the level. And so I think it is an area that is dragging behind other areas of abuse within society, and that spills over into sport.
Yeah, I think as well, just sort of adding on to what you talked about, Catherine, and obviously Gareth as well, I think what's worrying for me is that there's a lot of it coming from adults, but the bit that is coming from children, it's not been sort of stamped out higher up, i.e. it feels like at times, and again, I don't know if you want to come in this, Ashley, as well, but it feels like sort of learnt behaviour. And I feel like, for me, like we talked about, the adults should be the ones calling it out and saying to, people around them or their mates. But the worry for me is that it sort of filters down. Whereas I think, if we're sort of looking, and we'll get onto sort of the educational side later, but if we're looking to improve the situation, it needs to be a collective effort. It needs to be a whole, whether you're young, you're sort of middle-aged, or you're elderly. It's got to be, for me, a group effort. I don't know if you sort of want to add to that, Ashley, and sort of, like I say, anything else that's been said that you want to add to.
I think what you said about it being passed down, obviously, like, my granddad told me when I first started playing football, he told me that, women's football at one stage in the UK used to be bigger than the men's. Like, my granddad said he went and watched loads of women's football before he even watched men's. And then obviously it came when they got banned from playing, and then men's football kind of took over. And I think it's kind of in that mindset that the people who've grown up loving football have prioritize men, because women's has only just started to grow again through the use of, like, the big teams like Man City, Man United, giving the funding and stuff to get the teams where they are. And I think because it's been, like you said, passed down, and it's not being stamped out of, like, children, because they're so used to just doing what their parents do. Like, I'm a girl, but I go and watch loads of men's football, but I don't watch much women's unless I'm watching it on the telly, kind of thing. I don't go to a game. But I can imagine if I did, there'd still be a lot of probably men shouting something at the players. Or they'll usually, like, I've heard it a couple of games I've been to, they've, like, wolf whistled at the girls who they think, are nice looking or whatever. And for me, that's like, okay, that's not probably that bad, but if you're hearing that on the pitch, it's like that does come across as a bit like, why are they looking at me for that for? I'm not here to be the best looking. I'm here to play football and play for my team, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Gareth, is there anything you want to sort of add there as well in terms of that? Because obviously, like I say, obviously, we've been at games, and like you say, we've sort of heard things, and you call things out, but what you sort of feeling on the educational side? Obviously, like I say, sort of talking about behaviour being passed down, essentially.
Yeah. So from a psychological perspective, there's a lot of research that, and I kind of fall into the bracket that all behaviour to a degree is learned as a product of our environment, and that who we are as people is a construction based on kind of environmental experiences. And there's lots of research that's been done primarily on race, more so than anything else, where young children won't discriminate. They won't have an issue whether they pick up the black doll or the white doll, or pick up a doll to play with, and kind of won't really discriminate, particularly within the playground, and really don't particularly care about the people that they interact with. So this clearly, as a result of those pieces of research, shows that there is a point at which we learn these prejudices. And so again, this is going to come from the home and from the people that the children are socializing with as they're growing up, and kind of as a product of again of the environment that they live in. And so, you know, it is a societal thing, because with the best will in the world as a parent, you can kind of impart really strong values onto your children, but then when they go to school, then they're starting to then interact with lots of other people, with lots of other values being passed down from parents, and it is really difficult. So I just think the first step towards this, and kind of towards this societal change that we need, is going to be coming from younger children, which is why it's going to take years before there's any kind of real meaningful change, which obviously isn't great. And obviously, you know, we don't want to see any sort of misogyny within the stands. So it's kind of why I think that the calling it out is so important. We're not going to stop people from holding backwards dated opinions. That isn't going to change. But what we can do is try and shut down the safe spaces for being able to communicate in this way. And it's interesting that they point out in some of this research that online forums are rife with homophobia, with sexism, but also with homophobia as well. The kind of anonymization of some of these platforms, I don't think all social media being anonymous would make a massive difference. There's research after the World Cup, the Euros rather, in the summer, to suggest that the majority of the racism being directed at players like Saka, Sancho, Rashford was actually from traceable accounts. But like the really anonymized sections of forums, it is easy to be anonymous, and therefore there is like freedom to kind of just spout this misogyny, racism, homophobia, and that's kind of where a massive issue is. And I'm not entirely sure how we go about tackling that, but it is a deep-rooted issue. But there are ways and means of doing it, and I think the easiest way is going to be to stop people from being comfortable just outwardly displaying these opinions.
It starts at a really young age, though. We had a research project that was done here at Université Montréal, the University of Montreal, and they called it the playground effect. And essentially, researchers just went around playgrounds and looked at who occupied certain spaces. And generally, larger spaces where you would play football or play hockey during recess were occupied by boys, and it was really hard for girls to enter those spaces if they weren't really good, largely because boys would push them out. But this is something they were learning from the older boys that were being taught to the younger boys, and then the younger boys would become older, and this perpetuates itself. And then it continues into society where, like, I've had it happen. I was reading that thing and I'm like, I've played table hockey, which is like table football, except with hockey players, and literally been physically pushed out by male friends, something that I know they would never do to a male who was equally as rubbish as I am playing that. You know, this is something that starts at a really young age, which is why it can't just be parents. It also has to go to, like, educators have to be educated on picking up on these things and going, you know, this is not acceptable. Like, girls have to be given an equal chance to participate, and they have to be encouraged equally to participate, so that we stop breaking these barriers that keep women away at a young age, and then create spaces where, as you grow older, such as in sports, it might be acceptable to literally push or literally be vocal towards minorities or women or
Yeah. I want to sort of go on a little bit onto the sort of social media side then. And obviously, again, Catherine, we were obviously speaking sort of at length last night. I'll start with you, Ashley. Obviously, I noticed a tweet the other day. I think it was Sunday from Ellie Leake at Blackburn. Basically, it was the Burnley team had walked into the services and then sort of abused and derogatory and sexist comments were shouted at them from Burnley men's fans. And this is a club that supposedly promotes equality that have still yet to come out and condemn this behaviour. And sort of myself and Catherine were talking about every time you go on a post to do with women's football, the comments underneath, you can pick out at least half that are absolutely vile. And whether that's men's fans piling on saying, where's the signings for the men's team? If it's, for example, a new player that's signed somewhere. What do you think then in terms of social media? Obviously, how do we tackle that? Because obviously Gareth said, sometimes it is anonymous, but there's a line, isn't there, where too many people are crossing it, and again, like I'm sort of saying, it's coming from male fans. What would you like to see on that, or what are your views on it, or your opinions, or maybe if you've experienced something that yourself or somebody maybe has?
Social media is always a hard one because, like Gareth said about anonymous, there isn't very many anonymous people now. But I think the main thing is if someone gets banned off Twitter for saying a comment, for example, a lot of people did when it comes to the racism for Marcus Rashford and Saka and Sancho, when they got banned, it's like they always say they can just create another account and do it again and again and again. I think the way probably to stop it on social media for like women is if they see something, because I think Sky Sports have a link where if they see anything or if you see a comment, you can report the comment to them and they kind of deal with it. I think social media need more of them on different websites like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere. And I think the social media companies, I know it's probably hard for them because they have to deal with loads of different ones, not just for sexism. I think they should try and enforce a ban on the people. For example, not many people have more than 2 email addresses usually, unless they've got like a uni one or a work one. So like once they've used their email addresses, if they keep using the same ones or then they could clock onto it and be like, okay, these are going to do it again. But I think it's always hard to stop such a sheer amount on social media because it's such a prominent thing now. Everyone goes on social media. Everyone whom I know goes on there. So it's kind of really hard to say how they can properly stop it. But I think they have got options. It just depends if they choose to explore the different options and try them out instead of just doing nothing or the basics like Sky are doing where you can report it. I think they need to do a lot more, even work together with Sky and BBC and the companies that broadcast women's football. Work with them, work with the clubs to like tackle it that way as well could be another option. But I think it's a hard one to fully stop because everyone's got freedom of speech and they're entitled to it. So like it's hard to stop it in that way because social media, they'll hide behind a keyboard every time and you'll probably never meet them in your life. And women have got probably more so now than before learned how to deal with it a bit more because they're probably so used to it. But linking back to what I did say, I feel like it is hard to say how they can fully stop it, but I think more does need to be done. And they're probably some of the options I'd hope that they consider to look at, if they were going to try and help it in some way.
Yeah. Gareth, do you want to follow him?
Yeah, I think, just gone and looked underneath the Sky Sports News, the at Sky Sports News kind of announcement that Jill Scott signing for Villa earlier. And comments under there of, oh, we're announcing tea ladies now. People saying they shouldn't use the same name because they get confused. And just think that it's not that confusing. I don't know many men called Jill. And I don't know how we stop this. Again, a lot of these people, these accounts are, their profile pictures are their faces, or are them or have their like email addresses linked to them. So I think it's down to people on social media to report things, but also then it's down to social media companies to actually have maybe kind of more stringent guidelines on things like misogyny, because there's times when I've kind of looked through and seen things, reported them, and it's come back as not actually breaching the terms and conditions or terms of service of Twitter. And you just read it and go, how is this not a breach of that? I think a lot of the time it's probably because it's an algorithm that's checking for certain things, and if it's weighted, then it's maybe not quite reaching the algorithm. So I think maybe that's one way around it, but on the grander scheme of things, I don't really know, because if people are kind of brazen enough and not bothered to the point where they'll just kind of say it with their chest and not hide behind anonymity, then it's not as simple as saying, well, you need a verified email address, because people have that and are still saying it.
I think one of the issues is legislations just haven't kept up with the increase in social media. It also doesn't help that most of the people that are in parliaments and whatever other types of legislative assemblies that exist probably don't use it as much as, and don't realize the extent to which it's part of everybody's life, because they're over 45 generally. But like, yes, I agree with you, Ashley. Like, everybody has the right to free speech, but people don't have the right to hate speech. In most jurisdictions, they don't have the right to abuse. And misogyny is abuse, and misogyny is hate. And like, if most of those people who are completely open when they do this on social media tried to say the same types of things in pubs or I don't know if nowadays that would be accepted as much. And if they did it to the frequency that they do it, if at one point you wouldn't have the right to start intervening and saying, no, this is this is over. Yeah. But like you said, like, if we can't, one of the problems is sometimes we can't even define where the line is, even though it seems obvious. One of the good things that has occurred in the last couple of years is I do find it's easier to fight back when this happens. So I'm thinking like 2-3 years ago, when you saw incorrect posts that would link a male soccer player having broken an international record, and they're actually like 200 caps off the women's record, for example, or 80 odd goals off the women's record, which is the international record. If you had pointed that out on social media, you would have gotten a backlash of hate. Whereas now so many people are pointing these errors out that you're actually getting companies taking down false reports and putting them up with the word men or male in it. So that's changed. But on the other hand, like, you can tweet, like Sky putting stuff out, and they're constantly being hate. I think they know that it's Sky WSL or that it's Sky and Jill Scott is a woman. I think those types of people, and you saw it in the Durham report, 68% of people have no problem, of the men that were surveyed have no problem being misogynistic. So them going out and using this, it's just a way to express themselves. And so at this point in society, we need to have a conversation. Well, when do we stop allowing this to be openly acceptable, in the same way that we're trying to tackle racism and we're trying to tackle homophobia? Because it's only increased in the last couple of years, and all the studies show it.
Yeah, well, that leads me in nicely. So I was going to sort of, come to this as the next topic. With the increased media coverage now and the increased TV, I feel that it's making it worse, which is nothing against the TV deals, because it's needed, but it does seem, like you said, Catherine, more around, and you see it a lot more. Certainly I feel so anyway. But do you think, Ashley, then, that sort of the increased coverage has led to sort of more and more views? Because obviously, like Catherine was saying then, people are openly admitting it. I think that's the worrying thing. People are openly saying, well, yeah, I am sexist, and yeah, I do sort of shout abuse. You know, do you feel like maybe that's had an impact in terms of this because it's highlighting sort of female sports a lot more than say 3, 4, 5 years ago?
I'd say so in a way, yes, because obviously Sky took on the WSL this year, this season especially, and you've seen it gets a lot more viewers from like younger girls and a lot of women. But it's like even if men aren't at the match with like the young girl or whatever, it's on Sky, and 9 times out of 10, a lot of sports fans, like big sports fans, watch Sky Sports at some point, and there will be football on, and not always you want to watch it, but it's on. And I feel like that's probably, and then you see like, because the women's game is slightly different to the men's in a sense, in my opinion it is anyway. I still think it's the same game and the same rules and everything like that, but I think it's because they're so used to looking at the men's game and comparing the Premier League to WSL, you've got VAR, you've got everything, whereas like the women's game, it gets slated for being, I know sometimes they call it, yeah, it's too slow, it's not enjoyable and things like that. And obviously having that on a live TV stream now where a lot of people can watch it compared to before when it was on like BBC, you had the choice because it used to be on like the red button or iPlayer or whatever, so you had the choice to watch, whereas now it's like, you know, and then that opens up all of social media because Sky will be promoting it on social media, like watch the WSL live or things like that, and then people are like, why do I want to watch that for? And then but they still watch it, and then they'll open it up again to be like, well, what, I don't know why I bothered watching this when they could just have not put it on in the first place or not even make the comment. So like I do think it has changed a lot over the years, because I'm the first kind of major tournament and stuff for women I watched was, I spoke to this about this the other day, was the World Cup in 2015 when it was in Canada. Obviously England did quite well, the women. That was kind of the time for me when I knew the players and I was like, I'm gonna watch these, I'm gonna aspire, like look up to these. So like, and then I've kind of watched it from there, but I still saw like the backlash that they got back then, and then now it's just getting even worse because of obviously opening it up to more major TV companies. It's just encouraging, and their social media following's a lot bigger than, you know, some of the other stuff that's on there. So I think it does open it up a lot more for misogyny to come through.
Yeah, I'll sort of bring you in on this next point, Gareth, because I know, and you'll remember the conversation. It was I was at an event, a football event, and I'm not going to say where or who with, but I was at an event just before Christmas, and it was sort of, you know, there was male fans there, there was female fans there, there was sort of male and female players, and we're just having a chat, and somebody came up to myself, one of the players, and the manager. Now they didn't have a clue who the other two weren't aware, and they sort of had, shall we say, sexist and abusive views, and they were going along, and you know, he was sort of told, and I pulled him up on it, and sort of, you know, we had the chat, and I said, you know, have you ever been to a women's game? And he said no. So I'm like, well, why is all this hate coming out? You know, where is it coming from? And then I think he had a little bit of a run-in with the manager and the player as well, and it didn't end too well. But what I was going to sort of say to you, Gareth, was, you know, we sort of talking attitudes and things like that, and potentially people maybe feeling threatened. But what do you think? Because there's a lot of people, isn't there? Like, for example, that's why I was telling the story. There's a lot of people passing judgment and comments when they've never watched a game. You know, they just sort of go with what they deem is so-called cool, or, you know, makes them look good. But what are your thoughts maybe surrounding that then, in terms of attitudes, like maybe just from a male point of view? Because obviously, like I say, having heard that and called it out, for it to still carry on is just ridiculous from my point of view.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think so. I think YouTube is possibly like where a lot of this stems from, in that people who don't have a massive interest in the women's game will have seen clipped up compilation videos of fails, where corners just go straight out of play, where players miss an open net from a few yards, and so on and so forth. And these all get clipped together and get put on YouTube and people watch them and it's funny and haha, look how bad the women's game is and so on and so forth. Even though all of that stuff happens in the men's game at a similar frequency. Rashford missed an absolute sitter from, I think, 2 weeks ago from about 3 yards away, just completely missed it. So I think that's probably where it starts, and people will see clips on social media that people have shared because they're kind of, again, in their own little echo chamber of people that aren't interested in women's football. So people will share those clips and they'll watch them and they'll think it's really funny. And so it's probably similar as well with the African Cup of Nations at the moment. People clipping up things that happen from some of the players that played domestically in Africa in leagues with not a huge amount of funding or resources. And they're using that as a means of kind of like demeaning the entire competition. And so I think the best way to change that is to make women's football more visible. But in order to kind of have that visibility start to trickle down and have the effect that we want, you're kind of opening the gates up to a bit of an influx of these negative opinions. I noticed that Sky have shared a lot of like incredible strikes from the African Cup of Nations, and we're seeing people starting to respond better to that. But then you get things like the article in the Sun last weekend that was reporting the Chelsea Villa game, and they weren't talking about the game. They were just talking about the fact that Harder scored a hat trick, and Erin Cuthbert got one as well, and it was amusing. I think even on the picture they even cut off who the Villa scorers were. You couldn't even see. Actually, it was West Ham. Sorry, West Ham lost 4-2. And he just said 2 for Chelsea, and then had the Chelsea scorers underneath it. And you just think, when that's how the game's being reported, then that's how it's being consumed by a large amount of people. Because although it's declining, the Sun's readership is still mega, and that's how it's being reported. The Sun's website as well is free. And I absolutely don't begrudge places like the Times and the Telegraph putting content behind a paywall, but a lot of it is. So a lot of people aren't going to be consuming that unless you've got an absolute vested interest in what those journalists have got to say. Then the chances of paying for that are slim. So it's how it's presented, really. And I think now with the Sky deal, it is starting to be presented as more professional. There's a lot more women's content on Sky Sports News. Jonathan Morgan was on there a couple of days ago doing a segment, and these things are starting to be presented more professionally. Highlights packages are starting to kind of come through on there as well, although the women's football show is still at an atrocious time of night. But then the men's football league show before it moved to Quest was on after match of the day, so you're looking at like 11:50 p.m. before that was coming on. So that's only changed in the last few years. I just think that's the way, package it professionally, package it and show the highlights, show what's good about the sport. Don't just package the sport to be some comedy, because if you package it as being funny and comedic, then that's the opinion people are going to take on it, that it doesn't really matter, it's not particularly serious, and it's just a bit of a laugh.
Yeah, absolutely. Catherine, is there anything you want to add to that sort of before I pick up on a point Gareth made?
No, I mean, do you mind if I pick up on what I think it was Garrett, and it might have been Ashley, who mentioned why are they passing these, or it might have been you actually, why are they passing these comments if they've never seen a game before?
No, that was something. Yeah,
and I think it goes to the greater problem that football has long been, or sports in general have long been exclusively allowed only to men, where women in some cases were literally not allowed to participate. And I mean, there's still places where there is an arrogance that this should be allowed to continue, because that's the only way that I can put it. If you think that women shouldn't be allowed to be beside you to attend a football match, or that you should be allowed to pass comment on them, it's not just misogyny, that is an arrogance within it. You know, it was just 3 years ago that Lazio, the Ultras, said, we don't want any women in our section because this is a sacred space for men. And if you change the word women to anything else, we don't want any people of a specific race, or don't want it any other thing, like those fans should arguably have been would have been banned. But because it was women, the club's leadership was, oh well, we condone this, we don't approve of this behavior. And you're like, okay, well, you don't approve of this behavior, but they're vocally stating that women aren't allowed. And it goes back to my original place, like there is a certain arrogance that men have long thought that sports belongs to them, and how dare women enter into their place. Like, this increase in misogyny shouldn't be surprising, because if you see an increase of a product that's not just that you think is just yours, and now women are doing it, but yeah, I think we have to start tackling this problem that women, sports is not for one group, it's for everyone. And at its base, women and men are if they're playing the same sport, it's probably not going to look the same, because women are not physiologically identical to men, you know. And we have to start tackling what Garrett was saying, this idea that you can belittle the women's game because it doesn't look like the men's game, you know, because this isn't something that exists elsewhere to the same level. Nobody's going to say, oh, Jessica Ennis, she's shit. You put her against the heptathletes, she'd never win against any men. Well, it's a men pentathlete, but because that's a ridiculous argument. Obviously, she's not going to win. She's not built the same. So I think until you start tackling those things, this isn't going to go away. But it takes an effort that goes past just people or women or fans within the women's game speaking about it. It takes a greater societal change. And that has to come everywhere, from the fans at the bottom all the way to the leadership at the top, to actually go, no, this isn't just acceptable. If you have this attitude, you're not welcome to attend our games anymore.
Yeah, I think that for me was the big issue. What really rattled me as well as the comments was, like you say, sort of the arrogance or the attitude, because I'm like, I even said to this guy, I'm like, how can you judge something when you've never seen it, you've never watched it, you're just throwing out rubbish on what you think, you know, having not seen it. And like you say, it literally is arrogance, which is difficult, really. And it's sort of, you know, like I say, it's difficult when you call somebody out when they're of that mindset and that viewpoint, that, you know, again, you know, you say, well, why don't you come along and watch a game, and they just completely shut down, and then you get abused again, and it's like, you know, where does it stop? Ashlea, I'm going to come to you because I know you've got to shortly go. Just on this last sort of little bit, obviously, myself and Catherine last night were talking about sort of leadership, women's teams being treated sort of lesser by their men's teams or in general, and then that opening doors to sort of lead into discrimination or sexism and things like that. What do you think about that then? Because obviously, again, we've all got a role to play, but I just feel like sometimes clubs where they're supposed to be all one club sort of cast aside and think of their women's team as an afterthought. And I hate to throw Liverpool out there, but I'm going to come out and say that because, you know, these last few years, it's been absolutely dreadful, some of the conditions that they've had to train in. But what are your thoughts on that then? Because obviously it doesn't help sort of the fact, does it?
Not really. And I was going to say about Liverpool as well, because obviously they were doing quite well. They were in the WSL. They had some really decent players, and then they kind of have just gone slowly just down, and then obviously they've gone into the Championship. I mean, I think they are doing well in the Championship now, but and then you look at Coventry, was it Coventry United that temporarily had to fold because they hadn't got any money or anything put into it, and it's like, I don't know who helped them in the end, but you know, like Coventry City and teams that are quite local to them, I don't know if they did help in the end, but at the time they didn't really come out and say, yeah, we'll help them, we'll give them the money to, you know, keep them going and stuff. And I think to have them dreams, I think I remember reading the tweet, like the manager of Coventry United said, I've got to tell all my players the day before Christmas or a couple of days before Christmas that they're not going to be playing anymore. And so I've got players in tears, and that's like my Christmas present is they can't play anymore. And like that hit me a bit, because I'm like, they've probably played from a very young age gone up through to play like professionally, and then they've semi-professional standard, and then they're like, yeah, you're not playing anymore. Like to have that to happen, but obviously they're back going now, and then but certain clubs like Liverpool that have have had to train in some really poor places, and like that obviously exposes it as well, because clubs like One for All, I know a good example of one is Wolves at the moment, where Fosun are investing in the men's team, but they also want the women's team to do well, so they're investing more money into them to try and get them into the Championship and then the Women's Super League in years to come. Like they're doing it well, and I feel like if other clubs can, which I'm sure there are other ones doing it as well, I'm just using Wolves as the example. If other clubs can do it as well, then why crush their dreams and open them up to more abuse and, you know, sexist comments towards them and things? Then, you know, Wolves have been doing quite well, and then a lot of the comments I see from fans are like, congratulations to Dan because he's the manager, and then congratulations to all the players and stuff from like men, and to see that obviously is really positive. So like, if more clubs follow suit, then maybe that might be another way of reducing the abuse and maybe getting rid of it a bit more in terms of with social media as well. I feel like that would be a good way, but I think certain clubs need to look at themselves and think, well, our women could do well here if we invest a bit more, like Man U did as well. If we invest a bit more, you know, we can get them to a good level and playing really well and challenging for like trophies and, you know, getting more viewers into the club as well. Like I know your guys are all Man U women, you go to a lot of the games. Like to see that, and you obviously are quite passionate about it, to see like men going and being passionate about women's football is good to see, and I feel like more men should see it the way you guys do and be like, actually, it's a good, even though you might not agree with everything that women's football is about, because it can be like, at times I know can be frustrating, but the same as the men's game can be frustrating. Like, don't have if you got a comment, maybe keep it to yourself or speak about it afterwards when you're not in front of anyone, and then obviously then no one's going to feel the effects of it, except like if you're having a laugh with your mates, it's a bit different. If they're all men, you know, it's different, but like don't say it at a match or because you could get slated or you could really offend someone, and then you're back to square one again in terms of abuse and people feeling upset or angry and things, and then you're back to dealing with the issue again head on.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashlea, I know you've got football training, so I'd like to say thank you very much. The three of us will carry on, but like I say, really appreciate you coming on, and I know obviously viewers as well. Like I say, you know, they really enjoyed the Wednesday show you did on the referees, so it's been brilliant to hear your views. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. And I saw John's question about Wolves West Brom tomorrow. Obviously, I'll be cheering Wolves on, of course. So.
I think John's going down. I've no idea who he's cheering on, but he said he was going scouting anyway, as John likes to do in the Midlands. So
I'll be cheering Wolves on, definitely. So
there you go, then, John. If you're still tuned in, Wolves is the answer. Brilliant. Thank you, Ashlea.
No worries. See you later.
Yeah, see you later. Gareth, I want to link in then with you. Obviously, we were talking then sort of about male clubs not backing the women's side, you know, it potentially, or, you know, in cases has done and has been proven sort of encourage discrimination. Obviously, we talk about, or have talked about, obviously, the Man United men's account. It took them God knows how many months to congratulate the women's team the other week, and I think that was the first time this season. Where do you stand on that then? Because obviously I feel like, you know, if you are associating and you're calling yourself as one club, you need to be up to them standards, in my view. You know, you can't say, well, we love our women's team and we back our women's team, and say things just to appease people when actually your actions don't follow suit. What do you feel on that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, clubs should be promoting all of the squads. The main club account should be promoting the club, and the club is more than just the men's first team. but the thing with United as well is I don't just think that they're particularly poor at promoting the women's team. They're poor at promoting the under 23s and under 19s as well. There are times when, you know, I don't know if there's an under 23s Champions League game on until I drive into Lee Sports Village. So I'm thinking, what on earth is going on here this afternoon? And then it clicks me, oh, it's Champions League this evening. So that'll be what this game is. So I think that the club are just pretty poor at, you know, indiscriminately poor at promoting any side that's not the men's first team. But yeah,
one has
absolutely.
to wonder like how much they target their social media to the global audience instead of the local fans who are there week in and week out and who would be capable of going to see those games.
Yeah, 100%. And occasionally you kind of see some of the scores and maybe a few highlights or match reports trickle through as well. But yeah, I just think that, you know, not every team needs to do what Man City do and have their one central social media page and then the secondary women's one where the match day posting has gone. But yeah, I just feel like more could be done. It will literally take the social media admin 30 seconds to retweet things. But then, I mean, I don't know. I have never worked in social media, so I don't quite know how it's going to work. But I imagine why people are setting fireworks off. It's the 25th of January. I imagine that there are like prescribed tweets and things that they need to do and ways that they need to kind of appease whatever their job role is. However, they shouldn't have to, and that they should be able to retweet things and promote things that are going on with all the teams that are attached to the club.
Yeah, I'm just reading this now from Vincent. Obviously, he's talking about, you know, sort of the Everton game that's at Old Trafford in March, and it's only briefly mentioned. And then further on, he's talking about sort of being able to buy tickets. You know, again, if I go further up, let me find it. There, comment from Steve. You know, he was sort of saying about, you know, similar to what we were talking about before, you know, obviously having a daughter and then the mind being changed, which, you know, again, it's a small minority, isn't it? You know, a lot of the sort of topics that we covered earlier, you know, not everybody has a daughter. And I think even those that do, sometimes, you know, people still have those attitudes, which to me is like shocking. Like literally, you know, they still have these ideas.
I think people, if I can actually say, I've mentioned this before, not on your show, but on John's show, like this is one of my pet peeves is like, you don't need to have a daughter to realize that this is not okay. Yeah. And also like, you know, I've heard people that I respect a lot who like Brian O'Driscoll, for example, in Ireland is a really big promoter of the women's game. But I've heard him a couple of times when he's trying to explain why he's a promoter of the women. I have a daughter.
Yeah.
You don't need to mention that. Like you are a rugby player who supports other rugby players, and it should be the same in any sport. Like I think we have to get away from this idea that, oh, well, now that I've had a daughter, it is okay for me, who in the past had not supported women, to start supported women because I want my, like, we have to get, we also have to like stop infantilizing the women's game, which I think is one of the issues that often occurs. Like, I don't know if you guys remember the Arsenal-Chelsea game at the beginning of the year, if you had seen the emails that were sent out to fans. But when they held the first ever game at the Emirates, they basically sent an email saying, like, the women's games are more family friendly and, like, you have to be kind. And it's like, this is infantilization. Like, just because there might be children there, like, arguably there are children at both men's and women's games. Mm-hmm. And there's a level of language and decorum that you should, as a human being, understand is acceptable around that. Like, don't infantilize the women's game because there tend to be maybe more children than you might see in the men's game. I don't know, two little rants, but like, I do think that this comes again from leadership at the top. Like, if you're trying to promote it, it's how are you promoting it? And are you taking an attitude that, because like infantilization at its root is paternalistic. It's it can get to the point where it's misogyny. So like, you really have to, like, how are you going to promote this, and what are you going to be your attitudes, and would this be something that is okay on the men's side? If it's not okay on the men's side, then why are you doing it on the women's side anyway? Because yeah.
No, yeah, I was just going to say that was sort of the point I was trying to make. You just kind of made more sense than I did. But yeah, absolutely. Like, that's what I was sort of coming around to, the fact that, you know, it still happens whether people have a daughter or not. And the fact that it still happens regardless is that, like you say, it's something that shouldn't be happening well, at all. You know what I mean? Whether you have a daughter or not, that's not, like you say, you know, the main point of it. The main point is to try and sort of educate people and stamp it out. I want to sort of finish then for the last bit. Obviously, you know, Catherine, you talked to me last night about sort of investment, and sort of, you know, we were talking about, you know, getting the message out there that this is wrong, and trying to get away from the mentality, or to shift the mentality to try and improve it. And you were sort of talking about, you know, supporting women's sport, and, you know, don't just sort of isolate it and sort of discriminate against it. And obviously that can link into a whole host of things. But interestingly, you were talking about the Norway national team and Ada Hegerberg.
Yeah.
You want to just sort of briefly go into that and things about sort of investment, and then I'll let Gareth follow on, and then we'll close the show.
For those who aren't familiar with her, like, she's an incredible player, but after 2017, she stopped playing for the Norwegian national team, and part of her issue was the lack of equality within Norway. And they actually ended up giving equal pay to men and women, but she still hasn't played, because, like, equality isn't just one thing. It's a myriad of things. And in her opinion, like, you know, and I can't speak because I don't know how much of this has changed, but when you looked at the time, and even when they gave equal pay, like, girls didn't have the same training opportunities. They didn't have the same development opportunities. They were still treated differently when it came to medical, when it came to transportation, when it came to a lot of things than the men, and they were treated substandard. And in her opinion, equality goes across the board. It's not just one thing. You know, I happen to agree with her. And the reality is, when you start allowing substandard behaviors and substandard leadership for women versus men, and saying, okay, well, the women can accept this, something that the men would never accept because the game is still growing, or whatever excuse, then you open up avenues to paternalistic views, to misogyny. You also open up avenues to abuse. Like, we had a Me Too movement this last year within football, where, you know, women had no problem, started coming out and saying, you know, I encountered this, and I encountered this type of abuse, sometimes sexual abuse, like verbal abuse. And the reason that they encountered it, and that they essentially kept going with it, is there's very few avenues for women even now to play professional football. There aren't that many. It's a minority when you compare it to the men. So if this is really your only chance to do it, you're going to stay with what you love. So yeah, like, you know, the whole point with Hegerberg was, if we're going to tackle and we're going to get to equality, it has to be across the board. And that has to start with the leadership at the top, whether they're with how they're treating their players, and also with how they're tackling the abuse that those players or the fans or any fans might be getting. If you're not willing to do that as the head of any business organization, where you are at essentially an entertainment business, if you're not willing to protect the people that go to see you or who are playing you, then you might want to rethink your job, or whether or not you should be there. Just my opinion.
Yeah. Gareth, I'll sort of let you, like I said, just jump in. I just want to quickly read out Vincent's comment. Obviously, here he's talking about Man United, and I'm assuming this is referring to incident to Old Trafford, the way the club are starting to discriminate sort of the disabled. And it's sort of, you know, similar to what we've talked about all night in terms of, you know, looking to educate and sort of break down barriers. But do you just want to obviously maybe link in that with sort of what Catherine said, and yeah, we'll finish on that note, sort of at games as well.
Yeah, no, I think what Catherine said there was bang on, and you need to make your product, something that people feel safe and comfortable going to engage. Like, regardless of what that is, if like there's so many things that I just won't do because I'm not comfortable. Like, if I go and see a comedy show, I'm not going to sit in the front row in the middle of the stage because I don't want to be kind of picked out and made to be a part. So if I go to a comedy club, I'm going to sit in an area of the venue where I think, okay, I'm pretty safe here. No one's going to kind of heckle and sort of do that audience interaction that I don't want to be a part of. And as such, then that venue has kind of made it comfortable for people to kind of go and see. And that's probably not a great example, but any entertainment business needs to make people feel safe and feel comfortable and willing to spend their money there, whether that's going to the cinema, whether that's going to football matches or to anything. You know, you need to make people want to spend their money. And, you know, then you're right, that comes from the top. And whether that's making the mind-numbingly dense decision to sit your disabled supporters in front of the away fans at Old Trafford, or whether that's just allowing misogyny and sexism, homophobia, etc., to just be allowed to run through the stands. It needs to come from the top, and it needs to be easy to call this out. And it's not, but then again, it's not just the responsibility of the people that are running the club. It's the responsibility of everybody else in that stand as well. If there is homophobia, if there is misogyny, if there is racism or ableism or anything really where you think actually that's not right, then all of us need to be better at calling out. And I know that sometimes there are text numbers, there are ways of reporting anonymously, because it can be difficult to kind of be the one person that's sticking your head up and making yourself a target, especially somewhere like football, where, as we've seen from that report, the overriding attitude, it is misogynistic. You know, it can be difficult to kind of put yourself out there and stand up for people. You know, there's so many replies on Twitter where if anybody is like remotely complimentary or defensive of, you know, whether that's kind of female presenters or female footballers, there's just so many instant comebacks. Oh, she's not going to shag you, mate. Like as if that's why people are doing this. You know, we need to make it a comfortable place for everybody, and we need to make it easy to report things when they're happening, and then hopefully sooner rather than later, we can start to turn the corner.
Hager Brug's whole point with her boycott is that, you know, equality is not just one thing, and people being able to have the tools to grow to their maximum potential is not just one thing. And like, it's not, you know, the ableism thing, it's not good enough to just have a place where people who have physical disabilities finally can actually participate. They have to be safe in the same way that women have to be safe to go to public spaces and not feel like they're going to be discriminated upon, whether it's on the pitch or off the pitch. It's not enough to just do one thing. You have to make sure that how you're doing it is equal and gives equal safe access.
Yeah, I think that's a very good sort of ending point of the show. I think, like you say, you know, you don't want people to not go to, you know, games, whether it's women's games, whether it's men's games. You don't want people not turning up because of things like that, you know, like we've talked about with all different things that can happen there and abuse and things like that. I think that's probably the most important bit going forward. Obviously, we're still a long way off, and I think we're all in agreement on that. But I do feel like massively, you know, that when we're trying to build the women's game, especially whilst we're talking about women's football, you know, the last thing you want is people not turning up for, you know, in fear of abuse, in fear of safety, in fear of comments being aimed their way, whether that's a fan, whether it's a player, you know, whether it's somebody that works in the media, anybody that's associated sort of with the game. I think that's, you know, that's massively important that we educate people really. And like we've talked about a lot on tonight, sort of, you know, call it out where we can and sort of, you know, do our best to, like I say, to educate and to look to support those that sadly do get affected by this. I want to thank you both for joining me. Obviously, you know, Catherine, it's really good, same as Ashley, to get your insight and your views into this. We're we're back tomorrow. Natalie's back. She's got Rich from the Women's Football Fans Collective, and Susie Rack as well. And they're following on, so they're sort of talking about equality and rights in women's football. So again, another really good show. Thank you to everybody that's tuned in, and thank you for all the comments as well. And yeah, we'll see you tomorrow evening at 7. Cheers.